so it just kind of threw me off a little bit, even knowing that he was going to try to push the GJ, which I very much wanted all the information on a J and all the information on a GJ, because nobody else can make this decision for me. Even though a lot of people are trying, nobody can do that for me. I need to have unbiased information, and all of it for a surgical J, for the other interventional radiology GJ, and then I want to be able to make the decision. It's my body. I'm the one that has to live with this. Okay, so we are at the first appointment. We are going to meet the surgeon. His name is Mwah, which I thought was awesome. I don't know why, but it just delighted me. And I'm super nervous, and I'm glad that this appointment is about to be over, and I've got tons of questions and blah, 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 blah. So I'll fill you in on all the things as soon as I know. Okay, bye. I'm gonna insert this part after the appointment that I had with general surgery. The general surgeon had already made up his mind of what he was going to tell me, of what his suggestions were, before he even walked in the door. Like, we hadn't even spoken a word, and he was absolutely convinced that I did not need a J-tube and I needed a GJ, and he was super frustrated as to why I was sent to general surgery, because I didn't need a J-tube. Everyone is so highly opinionated when it comes to feeding tubes. I did not realize this going in. It was very much a shock. Okay. So with the general surgeon, I have a lot of questions. I ask a ton of questions when I go for anything, especially this kind of like permanent surgical change. I have a lot of questions. Okay. Okay. So these were my questions for, where are you? These are my questions for general surgery. So all of these, pretty much all of these, were based off of a J-tube. And all sorts of information, lots of questions. And he kind of half sort of answered them, glossed over some of my questions. And it was literally, and the ones that he would answer, it would be like, here's the answer, but you need to get a GJ tube. Like, it was all about convincing me that I shouldn't be there and I need the other kind of tube. But there were very specific reasons why my GI recommended a G tube over a GJ tube. Two biggest reasons are EDS patients with my internal problems and GI dysmotility from top to bottom, coupled with vomiting and all of that. So I had additional questions for the surgeon afterwards and emailed them, and I kept being told, well, you need to talk to interventional radiology. Oh, it looks like you have an appointment with interventional radiology. You need to ask them your questions. So I kept having to email back and be like, I'm not asking GJ questions. These are specifically J questions. And then I ended up talking to a nurse over there who was super nice, trying ridiculously hard to help, and made the situation so bad because she was giving me wrong information, misinformation. She wasn't saying anything that made any sense whatsoever compared to what my GI had told me and what the surgeon had told me like the day before. So I had to email, I believe, 6 different times and have 2 incredibly frustrating phone calls before the surgeon would actually answer my questions, my additional questions. And he did finally answer the questions. There weren't a lot of them, like 5 or 6 maybe. And so he did finally answer the questions, while again the whole time convincing me that I need to have a GJ tube. I never thought that getting to the point of making the decision with my GI to go with a feeding tube would be the easy part of this equation. I never expected from the moment we decided to get a G2 or a GJ or a J to now would be the hard part. And it has been so stressful. Okay, so that's the J tube consultation-y and getting questions sort of kind of not answered part. Okay, so now I'm gonna put you back into the other video and then I'll continue. So the saga continues with the feeding tube. So when I saw my GI the last time and we like totally like exhausted all of our options that are, you know, that I can tolerate and whatnot for oral medication and blah, blah, blah. And we had the whole discussion on the feeding tube, and what she gave me her opinion on what kind of tube I need to get. So she highly recommends that I get just a surgical J. And I understand where she's coming from, and a lot of it, well, it's twofold. Two huge big reasons as to why she thinks I need a J. So if I would go with a GJ, obviously I'll have one lead going to my stomach and I'll have one lead going to my jejunum. The point of having a G with for people that have a GJ is because it gives you the ability to drain your stomach. So, because your stomach produces acid and all of that all the time, even if you're not eating. And so the G gives you the ability to drain your stomach. And she was like, you don't want to drain your stomach, because I don't get sick after every meal. It's just like randomly like haphazard, oh, we're gonna get sick now. And so she said with a G, so if you say you drink 200 milliliters of water, so you have 200 milliliters of water sitting in your stomach. But if you drain your stomach, you're losing the 200 milliliters that you drank, and then you're losing like 100 milliliters on top of that because you're draining stomach acid and other liquids that your stomach makes. And stomach acid, how she described it to me, like directly equates to electrolytes, which is going to make my dehydration worse if I start draining. And overall, hooby, not a real great plan for right now. The other reasoning is because so much of my GI problems come from EDS, and because I get sick and when I'm vomiting and whatever, I mean, obviously you lose everything in your stomach, which we know, but depending upon how violent it is, like it pulls contents from your small intestine as well. So if you have a GJ, okay, so if you have a GJ, I don't know if you guys can see me, let me back up. Okay, so here's my rib cage. So if I have a GJ, and if my stomach is sort of in the same spot as most people's, the GJ will go in about right here, and it goes through my abdominal wall. That you can't see that I'm talking has to be a little weird, so hold on. Okay, now we're good. So it goes through your abdominal wall directly into your stomach, and so one lead is left in there for you to drain. And then interventional radiology uses imaging and whatnot, and so they can see out from your stomach, and then they feed another lead through that's connected to the same feeding tube, and it goes into your jejunum, which is kind of sort of the top-ish part of your small intestine. So if you are sick and you get sick a lot or you get sick violently, it can dislodge where your lead is in your stomach. It can dislodge the tube that's in your, or the lead that's going to your jejunum, and it can flip the lead that's in your jejunum, and so it flips around where it is, goes back into your stomach. And so sometimes you know that that's happened, sometimes you don't, and so you're putting feed in what you think is your jejunum, but you're actually putting it into your stomach, which makes you sick because obviously you're trying to get food out of your stomach. And sometimes it's so bad with EDS patients that it flips up from your jejunum back into your stomach, and then you get sick again and you actually vomit up the lead that goes into your jejunum. I've heard that is a very, very not fun time. So those are the two huge concerns from my GI as to why she highly recommends just a surgical J. Again, I totally make sense, and I get it, and I get the concerns from both. Now, my thought on those two issues is the second one scares me, because the last thing that you want to do is to go through all of this just to have your tube flip like 2 seconds after you get it in, and there's nothing you can do. Like, you have to go back to interventional radiology or the emergency room or whatnot to have the tube fixed and put back in place and whatnot. It's hard on your body, etc., which is very much not awesome. Especially considering that you normally have to have the tube changed just because it degrades really quickly in your body because it's dealing with stomach acid and bile and everything else. So you have to normally have it replaced every 3 to 6 months. And most EDS patients, not to mention with all of my reflux and all the other stuff that I have to deal with, it'll more than likely be closer to 3 months than it is to 6 months. And then if you have complications and you have to have it changed more, it's a lot for your body to process when it's already run down and blah, blah, blah. My thought on the first with the being able to drain and whatnot, so right now I can get away with just having a surgical J, but this is not something that's going in and then we're just going to willy-nilly it for a year, and if I start feeling better, we're going to take it out. This is something that I'm going to keep for the rest of my life. And so I very much am trying to think of this big picture and not just what I have to have right now. So if I would get a GJ, having the G doesn't mean that I have to use it. So it can just be capped when I don't have to drain all the time and whatnot. But down the road, if I end up having more problems, which tends to be what happens with EDS patients, especially with all the GI complications that I have, it'll give me the ability that I have it, like I already have it in the future. So that part I like. I like the ability that I'm kind of like future-proofing my issues, sort of, maybe, kind of, possibly, perhaps. Okay, so I go see the general surgeon yesterday, which is the one that would end up he would do the surgical J. And my GI had already told me that as soon as you go to surgery, they are going to directly try to convince you that you need to have a GJ. And so I sit down with the general surgeon and 2 other residents that are listening to our conversation. And so he's like, can you just give me like a super quick, why you have to have a feeding tube? And so I gave him a super, like, oh my gosh, 45 seconds of this is why I have to do this. This is where I'm at. And he was like, well, you need a GJ, and you don't want a J, and blah, 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 blah. Like, so at least I was prepared for it because my GI told me that that's exactly what was going to happen. I had my questions associated to the fact that he was going to do that. And so I talked to him about well, you know, what's the advantages of just a J? What's the disadvantages of just a J? And so he said, you know, there's more surgical complications with having a surgical J, because with a GJ, it goes through your abdomen, it goes into your stomach, and then it goes, you know, down to your J, to your jejunum. If you have a surgical J, your recovery is harder, which I totally understand, because you're being opened up, like you're having open abdominal surgery. Everything has to be stitched in place to try to hold it, because what he's doing is actually creating like a sort of stomach in your jejunum. Like he creates a pouch and then creates a stoma to give you that hole that your feeding tube is going through your abdomen, and it goes directly into your jejunum. It doesn't kind of like bypass your abdominal cavity and whatever. And so he said, and something that I didn't know is, he said, you know, it's much more prevalent to have complications if you have just a surgical, if you have a surgical J. And because how the tube goes in, like it's shorter, obviously, because it goes directly into your jejunum and it doesn't have to lead anywhere. And so because of how your small intestines are like affixed to your abdominal wall, which is what makes the stoma, the rest of your small intestines can like turn and twist and whatever, like kind of around the tube on the inside. You're not gonna have a clue that that's going on until you actually start having complications. So I didn't know that information, and I totally understand it. And he was like, you know, you're much higher risk at complications for the surgical J than you are for the GJ. And then I'm like, well, do you do GJs? And he was like, oh no, we don't have anything to do with GJs. You would have to go to interventional radiology, which in my mind kind of limits his credibility on which one has more complications, because if he has nothing to do with the GJ, he's not going to have any idea what the complications are for a GJ, because if you have problems with the GJ, you go back to interventional radiology. So he was highly recommending that I get a GJ. And so I got some of my questions answered in reference to a surgical J. Some of the questions that I asked were kind of vague-ish. So it just kind of threw me off a little bit, even knowing that he was going to try to push the GJ, which I very much wanted all the information on a J and all the information on a GJ, because nobody else can make this decision for me. Even though a lot of people are trying, nobody can do that for me. I need to have unbiased information, and all of it for a surgical J, for the other interventional radiology GJ, and then I want to be able to make the decision. It's my body. I'm the one that has to live with this. And then I ended up talking to the general surgeon's head nurse after he left, and because we were talking about paperwork and the other referral for interventional radiology, and we were talking about stuff, and so she gave me some more information when it came to GJs versus Js, and more peg tubes versus like button tubes, like Mickey buttons. And she was like, because I was asking questions about, you know, what does it look like on the outside? Like, nobody can tell me this. And I'm like, somebody has to have this information. Like, somebody can take a picture of the, you know, the fucking tubes and tell me what they're really gonna look like. And because I was asking questions of her and whatever, and she was so sweet, and she was so like forthcoming with information, like personal information, because she had dealt with a niece that had it. It was really cool. But long story short, she again was very opinionated on, you don't want a J, you want a GJ, and you don't want a button, you want a peg. And it's like, again, I appreciate everybody's information, but I need unbiased, unfiltered information. I don't need stuff rife with everybody else's opinions on what works for somebody else, because nobody else has the complications that I do. Nobody else has the mental, I guess, thought processes on this whole thing like I do. I'm not saying that anybody else doesn't have them, but this is my body. This is a decision that I am making for me now and me in the future. And all of this stuff is so much mental. Like, I have to be able to wrap my head around all of this, and I also have to be mentally and physically okay with what is about to be changed on my body. And it was so interesting because I was talking to the nurse and I was like, you know, I want to know what it looks like on the outside. Like, I want to know what options I have. Do I have to have a peg to start with? Can I change to a Mickey button in 3 months? Can I start with a Mickey button, but I can only start with it for a J and I can't do that for a GJ? Like, what are my options? And she was like, oh, you don't want a peg. And she was like, you know, you're here for a reason and you've been through a lot, obviously, to get to this point. And so, you know, you don't need to be so concerned about what it looks like on the outside. Pardon me? Like, I have to be able to look in the mirror every single day with this alteration that I'm making to my body. Do I absolutely help that this is going to give me the nutritional boost and malnutrition fix that I am looking for of getting a feeding tube? Absolutely. But do I also mentally have to be okay with this? And guess what, people? I am vain. I will straight up own it. Like, I love, not so much right now, but I love how I look. I love my body. I'm very happy with it. I need it to be healthier. I need it to be able to give me what I'm looking for, but I also still need to be happy with what I look like in the mirror. I need to feel sexy. I need all of that. So I still have another appointment and some other questions that are out. And so as soon as I do that, I'm going to put like a good list and a bad list together, and then we'll go from there. So I'll keep you posted. So I love you, love you. Thank you for all the support and all the awesomeness. You guys are great. Hi guys, I am in the consultation room for interventional radiology. All the things. So I am waiting to meet with my interventional radiologist about the GJ tube and ask a few more questions. And then hopefully we can get things scheduled because I'm ready to move this part along. The waiting is making me nervous. And we're back again. This whole going back and forth is super funny. And you're gonna see like different nails in all the videos. It's gonna be cute. Okay, so one good thing that the general surgeon did is he did set me up with a consultation with interventional radiology. So at my health system, general surgery places J tubes and interventional radiology does GJ tubes. And so they set me up with interventional radiology so I could talk to them, ask all of my questions on GJ tubes, and then with all of that information, I was crossing my fingers that I would be able to make an informed decision about this change. And I was so taken aback, I guess, that it seems like everybody is trying to make this decision for me. My GI is trying to make the decision for me. General surgery is trying to make the decision for me. His nurse was trying to make the decision for me. So I'm at this point expecting more of the same and a whole lot of no help from interventional radiology. Sometimes with chronic illness and all of the bullshit that we have to go through, well, one, it's incredibly hard for us to trust medical people. I'm not saying all of them, but when you have a new one, especially, and you've just come off like a bad string of them, it's really hard to be as open as we possibly could to their help and to their opinions. So, so I go into interventional radiology, call. We got the consultation scheduled, and I talked to a super nice lady, and talking to her about everything, and she's like, well, let's just schedule you an appointment. You can come in and talk to Dr. I have a hair, hold on. It won't get off. Anyway, so you can come in and talk to the interventional radiologist, and then you can ask him all your questions. And I said, is there no way that I can just talk to somebody for a few minutes and see if this is even at all in the realm of that I would be interested, you know, in like going this route. And she was like, well, I don't have anybody right now. But she was like super smarty pants. And she was like, well, let's do it this way. She was like, let's make you an appointment. And she goes, and so he'll show up as one of your providers, and then you can just email him, you know, email him some of your questions. You know, he may not have time to get to it before your appointment on Monday, but he might. Oh man. Excuse me. My stomach's been super upset tonight. Oh, and I'm so thirsty. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. And so we do all that, and I wait for him to show up. In my chart, he won't show up, he won't show up. I end up calling them back. They don't know what's wrong. I end up having to start a help ticket through my chart. And then they finally called me back the next day, and they were like, well, maybe he doesn't. And they said a lot of radiologists don't allow patients to send them questions because most procedures are like a one and done kind of thing. And normally they're just doing the procedure. They're not really like over your care or anything like that. This kind of thing is a little bit different because it's such a cyclical, like you have to change the tubes every 3 to 6 months. Anyways, and so we ended up having to go through all sorts of rigmarole. Finally got him added into my chart. And then there's a character limit. There's like 1,000 characters. And so how in the world am I supposed to discuss like 28 diagnoses and all sorts of apprehension on tubes at this point? Not to mention I'm not getting any help from the other department, and I really need help and I really need answers. And here is my friggin' 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that has questions on it. So I just gave him a tiny little, you know, blah blah blah, I need to get a feeding tube. I can't get, at that point I hadn't gotten the rest of my answers from the general surgery. And so I sent him like 3 important questions that I really wanted to know the answers to, and if that was like all he could answer before I got to the consultation on Monday, then, you know, it's at least something. But again, at this point, and I think it was Thursday or Friday, I was really thinking it was Friday actually, that I had sent the questions, and I'm like, I'm not gonna hear anything, you know, I'm gonna get no help over the weekend, and I'm gonna have to start from scratch on Monday during the consultation. And so later that day, I get a phone call, and I'm pretty sure it's from the health system, but it came in as unknown. So I pick up the phone, and I was assuming it was scheduling for something, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this guy on the end of the phone, other end, that I've never talked to before. And, hello, I'm Dr. blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm trying to reach Jennifer. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And this is absolutely my interventional radiologist. So he had a few minutes, and he was like, well, I heard, you know, that you had some questions for me. And he said, so I was just calling to see if I can answer them. And I was like, I emailed a few of them. And I said, but I've got a whole page worth of questions. And I said, I hate to take up that much of your time, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, I have a few minutes. If I have to go, I'll let you know. Hit me. He stayed on the phone with me for like 45 minutes, answered every question that I had, gave me more information than I didn't even know I needed to ask. He was amazing, like so amazing, I can't even tell you. So this, this one right here, nope, this one right here. Okay, so this one is his page. So I asked all of these questions, and then all of the answers are over here. So I asked him a whole page full of questions over the phone, and he answered every single one of them. He didn't give me his opinion. He didn't try to convince me one way or another. He just answered my questions. Like, it seems like such a simple thing. This was not a simple thing in the past couple weeks for me. So he answered everything, and I thanked him profusely. I told him that I'd see him at blah, blah, blah time on Monday, and he was like, no, no, no. He was like, I have a procedure. I know I won't be able to be back by then. And I was like, oh, well, do I need to just call scheduling and move it? And he was like, no, I'll tell them what they need to do, and they'll call you. And they absolutely did. A little bit later, they called and bumped my appointment like half an hour. Which wasn't bad, and I was like, are you sure that's enough time? Because he had a procedure and he was still gonna have to get from like the main hospital all the way over to clinic. And they were like, yeah, that should be enough, you know, there's no problem. And I said, okay, that's great. So I get off with him. I was so genuinely surprised. It was wonderful to talk to him. Like, it gave me this like ray of sunshine and sparkles, and it was really awesome. I had also emailed my head GI because I had some questions from her end. Hold on a second. Because like the feeds and the dietitian and the nutrition and how and what's and all like these specifics after the tube is in place has to be coordinated through my GI and then 2 other departments. And so I sent them questions because I needed to know like some logistics and whatnot. And so that's this page of information. And so she messaged me back, gave me all the information that I was looking for on that side. And I told her how frustrated I was with general surgery, and she had warned me at the last appointment, and she was like, the first thing that they're going to try to do is convince you to get a GJ. And so I was already, you know, somewhat prepared for it when it happened, and it was still horrible. And so I told her, because at that point I still hadn't had any answers back from general surgery, and I told her I was super incredibly frustrated. And, you know, and at this point I was like, I don't know how to pick formula that I need. I don't know how much I'm supposed to have, when I'm supposed to have it, when am I supposed to start it in the hospital? Are they gonna teach me all of that stuff in the hospital, or am I gonna have to make another appointment with GI and they're gonna have to do it? Like, I need to know the specifics. So she gave me the specifics. So pretty much like, because of some of my issues, outpatient for this first procedure is not an option, which is good because I have to be in the hospital for certain things, like for a couple days afterwards. And so she was like, all we need to do, because I had asked her in the email, you know, what else do you need from me to do whatever you need to do? And she was like, I know you're going to meet interventional radiology on Monday. And she was like, once you meet him and you get all of your questions answered and you make the decision and you're comfortable with the decision that you're making, she was like, all I need to know is which kind of procedure you're picking and a date for the surgery. And she was like, we'll handle everything else. She's like, we got you. So that made me feel better too. And so that was all for them, but I had to get back with them as soon as I know surgery date. Okay. So Monday comes along and I get to the hospital. They told me to get there early, and I'm assuming it was to fill out all the paperwork and whatever, but I always fill out the paperwork online because nobody needs those copies of papers. And so I get there. Because of traffic, I left a little bit early. I get there and get signed in about a half an hour before my appointment, but they can normally get me in faster and blah, 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 blah. So I sit there for 30 minutes until my appointment time, And then the sweetest nurse comes and gets me, and we were chit-chatting and whatever on the way to the room. And she does the vital thing and whatever, and I sit down. And she was like, okay, well, you know, let me go get the doctor and tell him that you're here and that you're ready. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. So this is 11. So 35 minutes go by, and I'm still waiting. Haven't seen anybody, haven't heard anything, haven't anything. And I'm thinking his procedure ran late. Something was, you know, didn't coordinate. He's still in the middle of whatever he's doing, and you know, I have no idea at this point when he's gonna be there. Okay, so like a few minutes after that, the nurse comes back in the room and she was like, okay, here's where we're at. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I was like, I asked them if it was enough time, and of course they say yes, and it wasn't. Oh, it was just frustrating. Okay, so she comes in the room and she was like, okay. She was like, I paged him and got no answer back. So she had somebody else page the hospital that he was supposed to be doing the procedure at, which was across campus. And she said he didn't answer me back because he scrubbed in for the procedure. And so they, you know, asked him during the procedure, you know, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, told him that I was waiting for him. You know, and as soon as he could get to clinic, greatly appreciated, blah, blah, blah. And so she was like, I just wanted to come in and let you know that it's probably going to be at least another 20 minutes before he's even here. And, but, you know, but if you want to reschedule, you know, we're more than happy to do that. And I was like, no. I was like, I have had so much trouble, you know, getting this taken care of and getting all my ducks in a row and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, so if it's all the same to you, I was like, I'll wait until it gets here. And she was like, oh, honey, that's totally fine. And she was like, if he's going to be any longer, she's like, I'll absolutely come in, you know, and let you know that there's, you know, some other problem, delay, whatever. And so I was like, okay, that's great. And she was like, well, can I get you anything? And she started listing stuff, and I was like, no, no, no. And the last thing was a heated blanket, and I was like, oh, I'll take that one. Because it was freezing in that room. So cold. So about 30 minutes later, he walks in the door, apologizing up one side and down the other, and oh my gosh, and then the procedure ran late, and there was something wrong with the room or the something, so they had to start late. So anyways, it's always the same thing. Like, I get it. And so he sits down, and while I was waiting for him, I had been chicken scratching other questions for him since Friday. So I had written them on sticky notes and blah, 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 blah. So I rewrote them. That one. So I rewrote them while I was waiting for him. And so he answered all of the rest of these questions that I had. And then he drew me a picture because he was trying to explain something to me on Friday when we were talking based off of sutures, because I'm having such a bad reaction to sutures right now. I've already had the lip biopsy sutures went bad, caused an infection. My back skin cancer surgery, those sutures caused an infection, had to be removed. Oh man. And so I knew that sutures were being used for this, but I was, before this, a little bit more familiar with J-tube surgeries as opposed to GJ surgeries. And so anyways, I couldn't understand what he was talking about. So he draws me a picture. Okay, let me see if you can just see it, and I'll just describe it. Okay, so here is me and my sexy self, and my ribs are up here, so that's like kind of like my diaphragm. So that's my belly button, the little button in the middle. And then you see a hole here So the hole in the middle is going to be my tube, and we're guessing on placement. And then the 3 dots around it, like the tripod, how they do it is they'll go through my abdomen and then go into my stomach in the right spot. And then they use these metal clips on the inside, 3 of them, and they attach to my stomach, and then it's attached to my abdominal wall, and then the sutures, the 3 sutures, that part of the sutures, is gonna be on the outside. And so right now that's our biggest concern, because that needs to stay in place in like a good ass long amount of time so that my stomach can actually heal to my abdomen, and everything is gonna like stay in place and it's not gonna separate and make all sorts of headache for me. So he drew me my picture, he answered all of my questions, he was so awesome. He was so awesome. Like, I liked him just as much in person as I did on the phone. He was so personable. He took as much time as I needed to ask all of my questions, and he was seriously awesome. And so at one point, and he was like, you know, well, if you decide to go with the GJ, and I was like, oh, I've pretty much already decided to go with the GJ. And I was like, because of how general surgery was and the lack of help I got and the horrible miscommunications in the department and between my would-have-been surgeon and his head nurse, I was like, I would not trust them to touch my body, much less something like this that is going to alter the way that I live and the way that I eat and the way that I survive. I was like, there's no way in God's great earth. And he asked me what the issues were, and I, you know, told him super short like what had happened, and he was like, well, I very much understand why you're asking so many questions and why, you know, you are looking to make the right decision for you for the now and in the future. And we talked about, I thought we had talked about all of the potential complications when we talked on Friday, and that was incorrect. There was about 4 different complications that are possible. Hopefully it's all gonna go fine, and there's a potential, just depending upon how my GI tract is when they get in there, which we think it's all okay because I don't have a blockage of any kind. I can still process liquid, I can still process food. It's just really, really slow, but I can pass it from my stomach into my small intestine. And so the surgery, the first part of the surgery is effectively the G tube. So they're gonna put the tube through my abdomen into my stomach, attach my stomach to my abdominal wall. This is really simplifying things, but that is the G portion. So it will give me the ability to vent. And then cross our fingers, everything is okay. And then to complete that portion of the procedure, they need to use all of the fluoroscopy and radiology and sonograms and all of their hooby magical bag of tricks, and get the tube from my stomach through my duodenum into my jejunum. So with those 2 things, if they can get those 2 things done, we'll be golden. And so it's those 2 procedures we're hoping to have done actually Friday. So the surgery is going to happen Friday morning. So I've got, tomorrow is, I literally don't know what day it is. That's so bad. Tomorrow's Wednesday. So I've got 2 full days at work to try to get as much done as I possibly can. So best case scenario, G-tube will be placed, J-tube will be placed. And it's actually, I'm going to insert a picture, because up until just a few days ago, I did not understand how GJ tubes work. So it's literally, it's a long tube, And inside that long tube is 2 tubes. So one of them is a G tube, which there are holes in the outside of the tube at the G portion of it that gives me the ability to drain the contents of my stomach. And then the outer tubing extends, and the inner tubing for the J extends, and that portion of it goes into my jejunum and gives me the ability to feed directly into my jejunum. So it's only 1 tube, but 2 tubes on the inside of it to stop and go and whatever where it's supposed to. So to start with, assuming all goes as planned, I will have a peg to start with. So it's 2 leads on the outside. They're normally about 6 inches long, and one will be for my G venting, and then the other will be for my feeds. And then it still has the, you know, third portion on there that you put saline, in a certain amount of saline, like 5 mils or something like that, obviously depending upon the tube. And then it fills up the balloon that is on the inside of my stomach, and that stops the, you know, stomach acid from leaking out. It's actually what keeps everything in place. Obviously they do everything that they possibly can to get the sizing right and all of that stuff. It's going to be a whole hell of a lot of trial and error for a little bit. So assuming those 2 things can get done and everything is great and good and fabulous, we'll be waiting about a month, maybe a little bit longer depending upon how I heal and my special snowflake. And once we get to that portion, so I'll go back in and have more fluoroscopy done and imaging and whatever, and then they measure everything, length of tube and length of distance, like for the actual from the outside of my stoma into the stoma and where the balloon is, because at that point I'll have a custom fitted low profile Mickey button created for my system, and then we'll end up, I'll go back and then I'll have it changed out. And as long as that one is okay, then as soon as we have to change them out, since you have to do it every 3 to 6 months, we'll know which kind of tube we have, and then any complications will adjust. Bigger tubes, smaller tubes, bigger balloons, whatever has to be done. And I will go back to interventional radiology every time that it has to be changed. So surgery is scheduled Friday, and I filled my GI in today that for her to be able to get the rest of the stuff that needs to happen. So the rest of it is a little bit kind of up in the air at the moment. We were kind of hoping the surgery would be Thursday, and then assuming everything was great on Friday and all the placement was good, because they'll rescan it all the day after, and then dietary and nutritionists and all of that were supposed to come the day after, and now I have no idea how that's going to change since it'll be Saturday the day after. At this point, there's nothing I can do about any of it, and so I'm just not going to stress about it. I'm nervous, I'm anxious, my body doesn't react well to this kind of thing. It's like it lights all of my nerves on fire. It's really bad. So hopefully we're going into it with a heck of a lot more knowledge, and so I'll be able to be my biggest advocate, and I take information for anesthesia, and I take information for my nurses, and my interventional radiologist is probably not going to be there when the tube is placed, and so there's 2 other associates that can do it, but it makes me nervous, and I trust that guy, and I've never met the other ones, and so it's a real big ball of stress at the moment. But hopefully we're getting closer to having help and answers and all of that good stuff, and I'll take you guys along for the ride. So thanks for everything. Send the warm thoughts and the good wishes and all that good stuff, and we'll go from there. So happy feeding tube. Bye.